That's right.
But how they got to Cuesta, does anyone know how we got to Cuesta?
No.
There's a
Right, 22 north, right? The highway.
Highway through San Juan.
Pueblo. No, actually, I'll talk about it. So, the first Rael who came to New Mexico was Alonso Rael de Aguilar in 1683. He arrived in El Paso in 1683 and he actually married a woman there in El Paso in 1863. And he came at the request of Don Diego de Vargas. He was 23 years old when he arrived in New Mexico. And he came directly from Spain. And in those days, you just couldn't come anywhere you wanted to. You had to go from Spain, from one port in Spain to Cuba. And then from Cuba, you had to go to Veracruz. And then from Veracruz, you had to go to Mexico City. And then you were dispersed to wherever you were sent. And he ended up here in northern New Mexico. So just traveling across the deserts of Mexico to get to El Paso was a 3-month journey. And then they waited in El Paso for the reconquest of New Mexico. And he rode into Santa Fe in 1690. They rode in to recapture the city of the Villa of Santa Fe because of the Pueblo revolt had driven out the Europeans, the Spanish. So this was the reconquest. And at this time, the other pueblos were already ready for peace with the Europeans, except for 3 pueblos, Taos, Picoris, and the Apaches de Acho. Now, the Apaches de Acho were good allies of Taos Pueblo. And the Apaches de Acho lived along the Rio Colorado, right up here in the pueblitos where the Apaches de Acho lived. These are the Indians who fought the Europeans in Santa Fe. And after the reconquest of Santa Fe, Alonso Rael became, he served as various things throughout the New Mexico government. He was the captain general of all the soldiers, so he was in charge of all the soldiers. He was de Vargas's personal secretary. He also served as the lawyer for the Pueblos. So anytime the Pueblos had a pleito with the Spanish government, he was the lawyer who would have to defend the Pueblos. And he's the one who actually brought back, during the Pueblo revolt, a lot of the Pueblos had gone to live with the Hopis. And he went out and he visited with those Pueblos because they wanted to come back. And he told them that he promised them peace if they would come back. And he helped to resettle what is now Sandia Pueblo and also Laguna Pueblo. Okay? He lived in Santa Fe and he was given a land grant by La Cienega. Okay? He had, I think, 3 or 4 sons. And one of them was Alonso Rael Jr. And he takes after, I think a lot of us take after him because he liked to drink and stay up late and gamble. And one time the cops were looking for him and he was hiding out in the northern Pueblos. And if you hear of Raels from Picoris, there are distant relatives because of that. I'm serious. Alonso Sr. was stationed down in Alameda, Pueblo, where Alameda is by Albuquerque. And he was there for a long time. And I guess it was pretty far from Alameda to Santa Fe because in the meantime he took up a second wife, Michaela Lopez. And when Alonso died, Michaela's children sued the Rael family to be included. And there was a big, famous lawsuit in Santa Fe. Of course, Santa Fe wasn't that big, and you know how Mitote is, so everyone was involved in it. And the judge ruled in favor of the Lopezes, so they became Raels.
Is that where Isque and Coronel began?
That's where it started, yeah. Isque. And yeah, that's where the Isque began. And that's actually through the Lopez side who who we are. We're almost not direct descendants of Alonso Rael. So the Raels, the new Raels down in Albuquerque, down in Alameda, they stayed away from Santa Fe because the other Raels didn't like them. So they kind of went around Santa Fe and they ended up...
Hey, what about our Jewish crypto Jew thing? Talk about that.
Okay, we'll talk about that too. So they went around and they were around the Espanola area, Santa Cruz. And they were there for a few generations. And then they moved up into Abiquiu about in the 1850s. One of the Rael families moved up into Abiquiu. They were in Abiquiu. This is already like the 1850s, 1860s, is when the large-scale sheep herding started in New Mexico. Before it was pretty much, you know, each farmer had a few sheep, you had a cow, you had a couple of pigs, and you kind of supported yourself that way. And it was about this time that large-scale sheep herding started. So the Rael family from Abiquiu broke off and actually moved to Cuesta. This was Jose Antonio Rael, and he was the first one to come into the Cuesta area with a large herd of sheep. For the most part, like I said, everyone was just small-time farmers. So
Jose Antonio.
Thank you.
They came, they bought the sheep. Cuesta was already settled. Cuesta was first settled about 1815. It was officially given a land grant in 1842. So there was already families here. And so they came with the intention of doing large sheep herding here in Cuesta. And they crossed over north of Arroyo Hondo. And what my dad thinks, what BLM now calls Miners Trail, they crossed right there and they camped up above, and then the next day they came into Cuesta. They crossed a young 3-year-old boy by the name of Eliseo on a burro across the Rio Grande. Eliseo is our great-grandfather. Eliseo they moved into Cuesta, and they were quite successful because there weren't a lot of people running sheep in this area, and they ran sheep up in the Red River area. Columbine, Red River, and Eliseo actually was educated in Colorado, in Walsenburg. And my father tells one story that there was so much snow along the road that he actually had to cross the mountains